Okay. Everyone, if you have any questions, you can just chat or you can just ask also. In the meantime, okay. So can you show us the cost? Because there's a rental property is minimum 14,000, right, per year. So uh to submit the as part of the documentation, the requirement is a 14,000 per year minimum. Should we have a rental lease agreement, rental agreement for 5 years, for example, or just 1 year
No,
is enough?
typically what we do is the agreement would be for 1 year, and then it will be renewed after the first 1 year. After the first year passes, then it will be renewed for another year. And of course, during that period, during the 5 year period, the client will still have the option to change the qualifying property from one to another. Okay, so a client, once he becomes an MPRB beneficiary, does not mean that he needs to stay with the same property for a period of 5 years, but he can change it. What is most important, however, is that the value of the lease must always be that of 14,000 euro annually for the first 5 years, okay? And it's also worthy to note that one cannot buy a property and then choose to let and lease a property for the minimum of 14,000 euro annually. So if one chooses to rent, he can then opt to buy a property during the 5 year period. But if one buys a property, then during the 5 year period, he cannot choose to change to rental option. Okay, that's the difference, maybe.
Okay, so basically, other than the 14,000, can you have estimation of the cost? So in total, when the applicant submit the application, what is the total cost? For example, let's say rental is 14,000, and then this cost, that cost, whatever cost, and then total how much?
Let's say that for the rental option, it should be around 150,000, but it also depends. It also depends on how many dependents shall be included in the application. And of course, on the age of the dependents. That's why we always try to obtain a clearer picture on the applicants prior to giving them a full price quotation. It should be around 150,000, but like we were saying, for adult dependents, there will be an extra charge of 7,500 euro for each adult dependent. So typically, what we do whenever we have a prospective client, we ask them for the main passport pages, even to carry out an initial screening in their regards as part of our onboarding process, then and then we give them an estimated quote on how much the full fee shall come to. Okay.
It's also important to mention that the 150,000, which is quite clear, includes 5 years of rental of rent. So that also includes it within the 150,000. So the 14,000, I think, times five.
Yeah, but of course I was only referring to the initial
The
14,000.
initial 14, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean for the first year, 14,000, and then the cost, for example, lawyer's cost, for government, whatever contribution cost, let's say for a single applicant, for example, how much is it? Other than the 14,000,
For a
how much
single
is the
applicant, it's
cost
only
for a
the
single applicant, let's say?
So then, like we were saying, there is the administration fee of 60,000. Then there is the government contribution fee of another 37,000 to the
So
2,000 euro donation. So that's already
something like,
100,000
yeah,
in there.
exactly, it's 100,000. And the
And
rent.
and the rent that would be 114,000. And then there are the health insurance fees
Exactly, and our
and
professional
our
fee.
professional fee. So that's why I estimated around 150,000 and all.
150,000
In
Exactly.
estimation.
in estimation. So okay. So once you okay. Uh okay, let's okay. I have another question here. Is it the only option to become permanent resident? So about the retired visa or the digital nomad visa is it applicable with a different scheme to have a Malta? Does Malta have a digital nomad visa and retired visa other than the MPRP?
So again, if I may clarify, so permanent residency, yes, it would be the MPRP, but Malta also has other programs in place, which are specialized tax programs. We do have a digital nomad scheme in place as well, and we can also share more information after the call. And we also have special tax programs. So even if it's a retirement program, if it's individual tax program, there have been some recent changes in law. So if you're looking to basically move to Malta under a special tax program, some individuals can benefit from a very favorable tax rate of just 15% of any money that is remitted to Malta. Whereas there's obviously the digital nomad visa, which allows an individual who is employed with an overseas company to continue doing that work while living in Malta. So yes, we do have these different programs, but obviously they do not result in permanent residence.
But for this retire and digital nomad, if someone stayed and renew until let's say maybe 5 years, can he or she apply for the long-term residence program?
So for long-term residence, yes, but again, it's not permanent residence. So long-term residence is normally you can apply for it after a period of time living in Malta. If I'm not mistaken, it's 5 years.
It's 5 years.
Of continuous, habitation on the island, which then you can apply for long-term residence. Because obviously,
Yeah, because long-term residence, you need a long-term stay more than 6 months.
exactly.
But the MPRP, you don't need to stay.
Yeah, that's a
Correct?
very
That's the
valid point.
difference.
Yeah, so MPRP does not impose how many days you need to spend on the island.
Mhm.
We always recommend, again, it's a beautiful island, so the more days you can spend on the island, do that. But there is no direct sort of imposition to how many days you need to spend on the island. There's also another question about the healthcare.
So for this one, was the healthcare like in Malta? So, like I was saying before, we are quite well known for our healthcare system. Of course, it does not mean that by becoming a Maltese resident, you will be entitled to free healthcare. That's very important distinction and very important point to note. In order to be entitled to free healthcare, one can, of course, there will be the health insurance. That's why it is required in order someone to have coverage in the case of having a claim to apply, or in the case of anything happening applying medically in Malta, so the health insurance would cover him. Or alternatively, one can also, if one is employed in Malta, then one would be paying the social security contributions, and he will be entitled to Maltese healthcare. Okay. Regarding the health check, which will be required, there is the MPRP3. That's what it's known, application form, in which essentially this will need to be completed by the doctor, by the medical practitioner of an applicant, and there will be a list of medical queries in relation to the applicant in order so that the authority would have a better understanding on the health status of such an applicant. Like for instance, if one has any heart disease, or if there anything else medically related which they would need to know about an applicant.
So, okay, related to this healthcare, the health insurance, is it like can let's say international health insurance from Indonesia, for example, they purchase insurance with let's say global insurance, let's say Allianz or whatever, the health insurance, or should it be a Maltese based insurance company?
So if I may, as long as the coverage covers Malta and Europe, they don't really determine which insurance provider it is. Obviously, it has to be a licensed healthcare insurance provider. But no, it doesn't really affect which provider, whether it's Allianz or another provider that you work with, as long as the coverage meets the requirements of the agency.
Okay. In order to be eligible, you have to have a qualifying assets, option 1 or option 2, as you mentioned, and your slide processing cost 100K. 150K is including the 14,000, no?
Yes.
As far as I understand. Oh, yeah, it's including. So
The question is
the
about the
qualifying
qualifying
assets
assets.
should be, yes, the qualifying assets should be in Malta or anywhere else? Of course, in Malta, correct?
So it depends on what the person who was carrying out the question is referring to. So if she is referring to the assets in which are part of the network of the applicant, then those can be located anywhere.
So basically, the 500,000 or the 650,000,
Exactly.
those are not assets. They won't be assets held in Malta. So they, as John was saying, they are assets that can be held
Anywhere.
in any country in the world, as long as they can be easily documented. And you can show, because you might have a property in one country and another property in another country.
Exactly.
You might have a business registered in a country where you are not resident. So no, those qualifying assets do not need to be in Malta. They could be anywhere, as long as we can show documentation that accumulates to that amount.
Of course, the property to be leased or purchased, then, in order to have a Maltese address, that needs to be in Malta.
Oh, can you show the slide related to this question?
Here it is.
Mm-hmm.
So these at the bottom were the two options. So if you have qualifying assets worth of 500,000, at least 150,000 of them has to be in financial assets, like we said,
Mixed
either
statement.
cash at the bank, or other types
Investments,
of investment, stocks, or whatever. If
but
you
not
have
Bitcoin or
not
cryptocurrency,
crypto, yes,
is not.
that's a valid, because we do get questions. Crypto is not considered as a qualifying asset as per the agency. If an applicant has 650,000 or more in qualifying assets, then the amount of financial assets needs to be less, that of at least 75,000. But
Okay,
yes,
so
I
the rest of the asset can be, for example, the rest, let's say 150 is the financial asset, so the rest of the asset for the proof, right? It's like a proof of funds, right?
exactly. So the 500,000, let's say, could be two properties in Indonesia, as an example.
Yeah, or whatever,
But
yeah.
150,000 would need be, for example, cash in the bank, or as John mentioned, investments or
It could be
stock.
anything. It could be expensive cars, yachts. It could be anything which the client has.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, actually, I have a question. For example, the rental is 14,000, um, but for qualifying for the MPRP, there is no minimum stay, correct?
Correct.
So that means um the rental property is idle because you don't need to stay. Am I correct? So
Yes.
I imagine I imagine there are a lot of properties that is are rented, but nobody, nobody stays.
Yeah.
So
Unfortunately, the agency is quite strict on that. So if the idea is that, okay, whilst I'm not there in Malta, can I rent it to someone else?
yeah,
It's
can
not,
we
it's
sublet
not,
this or sublease?
it's not permissible.
So,
But John can elaborate further.
but subject to one exception, as per the new program, and one of the advantages is that for those who purchase a property, they can let it out for a temporary periods only. And it's important that such temporary periods they need to be informed. So the agent who is representing the applicant would need to be informed of such short-term stays, for which the main applicant would have let out the property. Okay, so.
But this is only, again, as to make it clear, only for those who are purchasing a property.
Yes, for those who rent a property after 5 years pass, they have the option to sublet, but after 5 years pass, very important.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone? Is that enough?
Again, we are
Okay.
always open to questions if you want to put them to Georgina, and then Georgina obviously speaks to us
Yeah,
because we
yeah.
work very closely. So we're always available for any calls or questions that you might have.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay,
All
then
right.
thank you. Thank you everyone
Thank you.
for joining this webinar, and thank you, John and Isaac, and
Our
have a great
pleasure.
weekend. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Same to
Same
you,
to you.
and thank you for this. Have a nice evening.